Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our University of Calgary webinar series. Today's topic, Ingredients for Entrepreneurial Success. But before I introduce you to our presenters, I want to talk a little bit about your experience today. This webinar series is by University of Calgary scholars, and the information that we present to you is a summary of their research. You can submit questions throughout the duration of the webinar on your computer screen, or you can also keep the conversation going live on Twitter using the hashtag ExploreUCalgary. Now, in a few moments, we're going to hear from Suko Kwan. He's an associate professor of entrepreneurship at the University of Calgary. He's taught at the University of Kentucky, the University of California, and Temple University, and we're very happy to have him in the UCalgary family now. Our first presenter today is the Dean of the Haskayne School of Business, Associate Professor of Strategy and Global Management. And Jim, prior to coming here, you were a business leader yourself. My name, for everybody, is Kelly Johnston. I'm your moderator. But Jim, tell me a little bit about what you're going to talk to the audience about today.
Yeah, you know, I'm very excited about this because I love to talk about entrepreneurship. And today what we're talking about is more or less the context of entrepreneurship and why it's important and how you can make your organization, or what are the conditions that cause certain communities to be much stronger at entrepreneurship and innovation. So we're going to throw out a whole bunch of ideas there, and hopefully the audience will find it interesting.
And, you know, we're here in Calgary, and we're proud of our entrepreneurial spirit. You hear that a lot throughout the city.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a foundation of Calgary, going back to, you know, when the energy industry started and wildcat drilling. And so it's a big part of our heritage, and it's an important part of our school, and just thrilled to be able to talk about it.
Excellent. And you want to start us off with a question today, I believe.
Well, I think every prof should start with an exam.
Okay.
So, the first thing we'll have is a question. I'd love everybody in the audience to give us an idea what kind of a mix we have. So it's on your screen now, and if you could please click with whether you're an entrepreneur, an aspiring entrepreneur, if you're working with an entrepreneurial business, if you might be a policymaker looking to spur entrepreneurship on, or just interested in the topic. So we'll just give a couple minutes here for people to fill that out.
And has entrepreneurialism always been something that you've been intrigued by?
Well, not really, but I've gotten a lot more interested in the last, I'll say, 10 years or so. And it's a fascinating topic, growing in interest. You know, to be honest, in academics, it wasn't considered sort of a legitimate field, if you will, until about 15, 20 years ago. But now it's very, very prominent, very popular. And there we got some results. So it looks like we have mostly aspiring entrepreneurs. Are you an entrepreneur, Kelly, or are you?
Yeah, I'd like to find out if I am, because I think the definition can be different for different people. Because it can be about thinking, not just starting your own business. Is that right?
Exactly. You know, we actually have a saying, which is that we are all entrepreneurs, which is to say you just have to put your mind to creating something new with new value or a new way of doing things, and voila, you're an entrepreneur. And that could be value in terms of financial value, or it could be just saving you some time, doing something that helps others. There's lots of different outcomes from being an entrepreneur. That question was so much fun. I want to follow up with another question. And what this comes from is when I started my study on entrepreneurship, and I was really curious why entrepreneurship is so popular, I sort of developed my own hypothesis. Well, that's easy. It's because we live in fast-changing times. And so I'm going to ask the audience, do you feel we live in fast-changing times? I mean, when I speak to people, actually, I often ask, do you think these are the fastest-changing times ever? And let's see what the answer comes back with.
I think a lot of people, it's, slow uptake on the computer still. We've had them for a while, but not everybody is using them maybe to their full advantage. So I know that's still a shift for many people that I speak to.
Well, that's a secret. I'll talk about that a little later on. Yes, it's resounding. Yes. We're going to have to go and find those 8.3% people who said no and find out where they said no, but maybe not right now. This is so common. I always get this, people say, no, it's really fast-changing times, and we have to change to be up with the times. I'm going to flip to a chart which is going to really put that into question. So here's what this chart shows. It's sort of how do you live your daily life, the things that really represent how we go through our days or even weeks and years. And what's the pace of change been over the last 130 years? So let's go back 65 years to around 1960, and another 65 years to the late 1800s. And let's do some comparisons. So if we start with personal travel, well, back in the 1800s, it was horse and carriage. Nobody even conceived the idea of a car. And what I found interesting when I was doing this was the advertisement for the Mustang was almost exactly the same for the 1965 Mustang as for the 2015, same color, same angle. Could be the same highway, I'm not completely sure. But it kind of shows that over a 65-year period, there really wasn't that much change. And as we go down the list, air travel, of course, nobody conceived that there would be commercial airlines, any kind of air travel in the 1800s. And from the 1960s today, we've just continued to refine the Boeing 737, add a few more bells and whistles. Home heating, imagine, and those who are in Canada will know that it can get pretty cold in winter. Imagine having to stoke a wood stove to keep your house warm, and honestly, there's no change over the last 65, arguably the last 85 years there. Same with home plumbing. On and on it goes, that we see less change than what one might think in terms of our daily lives. Sure, we've got apps, and you're getting lots of information flow, and the information flow is very quick. But does that really signify changing times? Well, I want to draw the comparison a little more stark way by looking at the situation that somebody who grew up, let's say somebody who was born in like 1860, she would have grown up in a world of horses for travel, candles for light, salting and canning for food preservation, and telegraphs for communication. In the world of their passing, so over their lifetime, they would have seen it switch to cars and airplanes, electric lights, refrigerators, telephones, motion pictures. And this professor from Berkeley causes him to ask, we find ourselves wondering why our present progress seems so paltry. And I love this quote from Peter Thiel, who's a Silicon Valley venture capitalist. We were promised flying cars, and instead we got 140 characters. So it kind of shows that, are we really in fast-paced change or not? To answer this question, we have to say, well, what causes change? What is the driver of change? Any economist will tell you that it all starts with a foundation of technology, and in particular, big technology, like something called general purpose technologies. And I want to pay careful attention to this definition. They're pervasive technologies that provide an inventive platform. In other words, more can be invented off of them. And they interrupt and accelerate, so make things faster, the normal march of economic progress. And they say, well, that's interesting, Jim. Give me an example. Well, how about the wheel? Now, there's something that's definitely pervasive, definitely providing an inventive platform, everything from cars to, well, anything that's mobile. Plus, think about horizontal wheels and being able to do pottery and such. Another one is a printing press, which some would say we never would have realized the benefits of the Renaissance period if we wouldn't have had the printing press to capture a lot of that. And then there was the Industrial Revolution in the 1700s, which really changed our productive capacity and really had a big impact on economics and science. Here's a little known fact that people don't really talk much about. All of these general purpose technologies I've shown here are like hundreds, if not thousands of years apart. And there were other ones along the way, but they happen very infrequently. In the late 1800s, there were 3 general purpose technologies that happened within 3 years of one another. And they changed everything for us. Telephone, the internal combustion engine, and the light bulb within 3 years of one another.
And those are phenomenal changes.
Phenomenal
I see now what you're saying, because I think it's a computer and it's changing every time, but it's still a computer. It's still had it for a long time. So yeah, that's a great way to switch my thinking.
Yeah, and so one has to wonder, how has that really impacted us? And so I charted that out and looked at North America, and what this chart shows is a percent of population that adopted each of these general purpose technologies over the 20th century. And instead of plotting the light bulb, I plotted electricity, and that's that example of an inventive platform. And let me just show you how that works. You start with a light bulb. That allows you to have electric distribution to homes. And then you can have home heating, you can have appliances, you can move to TVs, and so on and so forth. So I plotted electrical distribution to homes. I plotted telephone distribution to homes, and plotted the automobile in terms of percent of population. And so that's a comparison of number of cars with population. You'll see a little bit of a kink in sort of the 1930s, 1940s on the automobile. And that was due to two things, actually, the Depression and then the World War II, where a lot of the production capacity was shifted from building cars to building things that would take us through war. So you can see that and if you start thinking about, like, the internal combustion engine drives you to cars, which then cars need roads, they need gas stations. To build all these cars, you need steel, so you need mining, and you need to be able to foundries to be able to produce steel and rubber and so on and so forth. That's why we had the real heydays of the 20th century. And to be honest, that's what Donald Trump is referring to when he says, I want to make America great again. Because this was a tremendously great period of growth and economic prosperity for a lot of people, changed lifestyle for so many people. Now, you might be saying, as Kelly has alluded to, that during this period we're missing another technology that came along, which is the computer. And some would say, okay, that's Industrial Revolution version 3.0. But this chart, this slide is titled Principle 1, Constricted Vision, for a reason. Because my theory is, and it's not just me, actually, I should credit it mostly to Northwestern economist Robert Gordon, who says we have taken the computer, possibly the most amazing technology of zeros and ones that can really think, actually, and we spent about 50, 60 years trying to make it a telephone because that's all we could see. Like, our vision is so constricted. Oh, great, we have a better typewriter, and we have a telephone, and now we have a TV. Our vision is very constricted with what we had developed through Industrial Revolution 2. So we're missing a lot. And that is a big question for the day. So that's one principle. We've got issues with constricted vision. The second one is we have issues in terms of our theory to study what happens with general purpose technologies and how it drives societies. Most of our management theory, virtually all of it, was developed in the 1960s. And from that period on, a lot of the Industrial Revolution 2.0 major inventions were already in play, and we were into the point of exploitation and commoditization, which really explains why the dominant management theory of the day is Michael Porter's differentiation or cost leadership. In other words, we're always just fiddling around the edges. Can we add more bells and whistles and make our product a little more appealing, or can we make it faster, smaller, cheaper, and run it through Walmart or Costco or something like that? So as a result of those two conditions, where we've got the constricted vision and we've got limited theories, I have to ask the question of are we actually capable of moving forward with the next series of general purpose technologies, or are we going to fail like arguably we failed with the computer? And what I mean there is we have right on the edge of pervasiveness, 3D printing, machine learning, automation, then there's nanotechnology, and there's new energy sources, energy transitions, and finally we've got biotechnology and genomes. So there's lots of exciting stuff right on the edge, and there's two schools of thought. So as I mentioned, Robert Gordon, here's a lovely picture of him. He kind of feels, you know what, we have the blinders on too much. We have constricted vision, narrow theoretical lenses, and we're going, and all of the inequities in terms of income inequity and people liking the way things are, it's going to resist us from adopting new technologies.
So you bring up a lot of good points in that area with restricted vision, and we have a few people in our audience wondering, like, so how do we take the blinders off? How do we get those great ideas?
That's exactly where we're going right now with this presentation, to try and address some of those points. So we have a problem. We have a big problem, and we need to come up with some solutions. So we don't know what the future holds for us, and we don't know the challenges our students will face. So remember, I'm always looking at this in terms of what can we do for our school. If we don't understand the challenges, how can we give them the answers? Well, of course we can't, but we can teach them how to tackle unknown problems. And one way is to teach both critical thinking and entrepreneurial thinking. Let me show you where those fit on a scale. If you look at the idea of problem solving being either expansive or reductive, critical thinking is the art of taking 2 or 3 known solutions and then reducing it down to pick just one and move forward. Entrepreneurial thinking is always being open to the next big idea. And in fact, you don't have to have a problem to be an entrepreneurial thinker. You can just go out there and look for an answer, for a solution, for a new way of doing things. As well, the x-axis here is between there's only one answer and there's multiple answers. And that's, again, the beauty of entrepreneurial thinking. And what we can teach students is that there's more than one solution. And there's lots of different ways that you can move forward and make things work. Now, if we take this up to the organization level, again, we have to realize that what we're taught today is that there's basically 2 stages of a firm's development. There's a startup firm or entrepreneurial firm that's very high risk, has very low resources. You know, you might be getting paid in shares, and there's low stability. You don't know if it's going to be around tomorrow. And you keep plowing away at that, and then there comes a period, maybe 5 years down the road, when woohoo, we know we're going to make payroll, and everyone's excited, and boom, you think you're an established firm, and everything's safe, low risk, high resources, more stability. That's the old model, or at least that's the theory of the old model. But what I'm going to suggest to you is that that model doesn't really work, and here's the evidence. 120 firms over a 20-year period, and this plots their survival rate as they are active over the 20-year period. And the things that you'll notice, and these are not just, like, it doesn't include holding companies, these are all active operations. So they all have a storefront or they have an office with people working in them. And you'll notice in 5 years, it's down to a 50% survival rate. So that would be the stage 1, stage 2 theory. If stage 1, stage 2 held true, you'd see a real flatlining happen after that point, but you don't. You see it continue to slide down, which means firms continue to fail. And in fact, Mac Van Willigen, one of our great advisors, has quoted, he says, even the most successful companies are only 2 years from possible failure.
That's shocking.
It is shocking. So we have to be a lot more nimble. And this idea of teaching entrepreneurial thinking is really critical for the survival of our firms. So I'm just going to jump forward a couple of slides and show you what this means. So this is an example of a firm. It's called Nucor Steel. It actually started as a truck manufacturer and then went into something called materials testing. So this is a nuclear densometer to test the compaction of soil in the middle there, and eventually ended up as a steel company. And what's the interesting thing I found is that If you look at the Dow Jones Industrial Average, it's based on the 30 largest, most stable firms in the world. 29 of 30 firms are in a different business today than when they started. So this looks like a stark example and really out of the box, but the truth is, if you look at 3M, if you look at DuPont, if you look at Honda, if you look at IBM, they've all gone through major transitions.
But they couldn't have come up with that perfect solution the first time. So does that mean you have to accept failure at some point? Like some people, I'm not sure. Where do you get to that next step?
It's a really good point. So I'm going to move to the slide where we talk about what are the ingredients within an organization. And what we found in the research is there's three, you can bundle it into three circles. Number one is you need an entrepreneurial culture within your firm, which means there's a clear narrative across the firm. In other words, the CEO makes it clear that we're open for different ideas and we're going to try things. And some things are going to fail and we're going to be okay with that. There's a real appreciation of failure and success. One of the firms I really like is Honda. Mr. Honda actually said that success is the 1% that comes out of 99% of what we call failure.
Holy.
Yeah. And but you also need opportunity recognition. And this is the idea here is that we tend to think there's really brilliant people that will come up with the ideas, and there's somebody in a lab coat or somewhere, in the corner that's going to save us. The truth is the best ideas of all come with everyday people using effective processes. And, an easy one is done properly, which it often isn't, is brainstorming. We have tools. We have something called the strategy canvas. We have a lot of different tools that help people. So the important thing is to get people who are passionate about the problem, who come from different perspectives and different knowledge bases. So mix an engineer with an accountant, with a human resource person.
So we get into that kind of interdisciplinary idea, which I know at the University of Calgary is something that's really pushed and appreciated.
And for good reason, because it works. It works big time in being entrepreneurial, being nimble, and coming up with solutions to problems or identifying new opportunities.
And sometimes we see solutions from one area actually fit somewhere else all of a sudden. Like you only thought it was applicable in one area. Do you have some examples of that?
Ooh, examples. Oh, you got me on the spot, but it's, I guess, no, I had one and I lost it. But you're absolutely right. Quite often what we'll do, one of the exercises we'll do is say, okay, let's take everybody out and see what's going on in retail and what's hot in retail or what's hot in the airlines, what's working and why is it working. Can we adopt those principles and bring them into our business? So that's something that we would do in our executive education as an example to help people think entrepreneurially. And then you need the circle saying constrained resources. That's just a recognition that, no organization has endless funds or endless reams of people who can work on things. But it's important to recognize how you approach. So bricolage is the idea that I can visualize the end result. I don't know how I'm going to get there, but let's keep that vision alive and let's go after it. Let me give you an example. On Apollo 13, the movie, NASA, they get a group of engineers in a room and dump all the stuff on the table and say, okay, here's a problem. Those astronauts are going to die, and they have a filter that's square, and they have to put it into a round canister, and you need to show them how to do that in the next 20 minutes or they're all going to die. So the vision is clear. We know what success means, but they have no idea how they're going to make it happen. And they do, of course, in the movie and in true life. Develop them and send up the protocol that saves them all.
And I think that's the important piece. That was a true life example of getting a bunch of people in a room and coming up with a new vision, a new way to use the same old thing.
Exactly. And my favorite bricklayer, by the way, is the person that many people know through TV. His name is MacGyver. And then the other side is, we call it, our technical term is effectuation, which is really to say, this is the Honda approach. I've just come up with this really cool motor. It's micro-sized. I don't know what to do with it. Let's just keep developing it. And we don't know where it'll go. And ultimately, it turns into robotics that revolutionizes the medical industry. So here's just some real quick examples. This is what we see time and time again. The companies that actually survive the long term, it's not about finding that one special secret that we call sustainable competitive advantage. It's actually how they manage change that allows them to survive. And that means that we need to be teaching a lot of entrepreneurial thinking. I know people have said, Jim, what's a takeaway for me? So here's 3 key points. If you're running an organization or a unit within an organization, start small. So strive to adopt an entrepreneurial culture in part of your business. So a team of 8, something like that. Don't try and get 1,000 people to change overnight. Number 2 is get an idea. So use the processes of brainstorming and strategy canvas or whatever. Don't expect brilliance right off the bat, but find something to pursue as an opportunity. And number 3 is deeply commit. Just give it your deep commitment, go through the failure stages, see what you learn out of the whole process. And I think you'll be a better organization.
Well, Jim, thank you. Now, we have a number of questions for you. We're going to do a couple of them, but we want to get to our second presenter quite quickly, so we'll come back to questions at the end as well. We have some students listening today, and they're asking, like, how do I balance that idea of trying to be an entrepreneur and still be a student, or how can I work that into my daily life as a student?
Well, student is number 1. I mean, it's a common question because it's an easy thing to get excited about, being an entrepreneur. Let me just say that I unfortunately know people who were a little too dedicated to their entrepreneurial initiatives. They often don't work out the way that we see that they will, and entrepreneurs are hugely optimistic, and I would argue not risk takers because they don't see the risk. They see this is going to work for sure. But then 5, 7, 10 years down the road, their venture hasn't really done what they wanted. They've only got 2 or 3 years out of their schooling. You know, I really think it's very important to get that foundation of the, you've got so many years. Sam Walton started Walton's in his 50s. Ray Kroc started McDonald's in his 60s. I mean, you don't have to, I know it's popular today, but you don't have to become a star entrepreneur in your 20s.
Okay, and I want to ask you one more question, which I think springboards nicely into Soku's presentation coming up. A lot of companies, or one of our audience members is making a statement, a lot of companies need to innovate to survive. How do they move beyond the entrepreneurial stage while not losing the ability to free think and innovate?
Well, I think the secret really of the great companies that I've seen, they always maintain that entrepreneurial spirit. Even when they're kind of at those plateaus, they're continually looking for what's the next big thing. In fact, so I know we want to move on, but I'll just suggest to the audience, maybe look up the firm Nokia. I mean, they have made some really radical changes, and just 3 years ago, they sold their mobile phone division to Microsoft for $13 billion, which Microsoft had to write off. But they're putting all of that money into something brand new again. So when you look at a big company like that,
that's a risk taker.
Wow.
Okay, thank you so much. Now I want to introduce you to Sokwan and his presentation today. And really, a lot of companies in your research are finding trust is a very important factor in having companies move forward and having communities move forward as entrepreneurs.
Exactly. So I think what Jim's presentation really highlighted is what are the key ingredients for the entrepreneurial success from the company's point of view. What I like to talk about during my portion of presentation is focusing on what is it about the community, from the community perspective, how do you encourage entrepreneurship. So the key ingredients for entrepreneurial success from the community's perspective. So that's what I'm going to talk about.
Excellent.
And we'll also move on to my presentation. So every year we see a lot of rankings thrown at us. So one thing big for the people like us who works at the university is the university ranking. So we get that.
Yeah.
And the same thing happens with entrepreneurs as well. So on the slide here, I sort of randomly pick certain kind of rankings for the best place to start your business. So sometimes the ranking list of best places from the at the city level, and sometimes they talk about at the country level. So we have that, and the reason why people care about these best places for entrepreneurship is quite obvious. So if you look at entrepreneurship and its impact on job growth, entrepreneurship is really sort of the key engine for the job growth. So if we just randomly pick two countries, for example, the U.S. and Japan, the U.S., for example, without startups, every single year we are going to, the country will lose jobs. So the new companies are really key ingredients for the creating new jobs. In the case of Japan, for example, old companies, in this case, the companies that we are talking about is companies created before 1996, has been shedding a lot of jobs, about 3 million jobs. On the other hand, if we look at the new younger companies those created after 1996, for example, has been adding jobs. So on total, if you just look at so the companies and you realize that it is young companies, startups that's adding a lot to the job growth. So it is all the more reason why we are sort of focusing on entrepreneurship.
And really important kind of, I think, in our economy right now, because we're seeing so many companies in that shedding experience right now.
Yeah.
So that entrepreneurialism is really something that we can see could take off if we get the right hook.
Right, and it is why so all the policymakers, government officials, as well as everyone who are interested in job growth are focusing on entrepreneurship as a sort of the way to encourage more jobs. So where are we standing in terms of the city, for example, here? So if we look at moving to the next slide here. Ooh, I moved to...
Let me help you with that, Soku. I think it's on this one. Your city rankings that you want to
Right, exactly. Thank you, Kelly. So if you look at, this is the 2016 Entrepreneur City Ranking, comes from the survey done by the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. If you look at here, you will see that Calgary is ranked, Calgary periphery is ranked as about number 6 here. And then if you look at the previous 3 rankings, Calgary was actually ranked as a number 1. So I think it's probably the oil energy economy that was bring down the Calgary ranking here. So we've been doing so decently last year and has been doing very well prior to last year's.
It kind of emphasizes how much entrepreneurialism is happening in our city. So even like you say, even if we've dropped a bit in the rankings, we're still seeing a lot of possibilities for growth and a lot of people taking advantage of that.
Exactly. And one of the reasons why we are so good, the city of Calgary is so good, has been because entrepreneurs have resources to start their business. So sometimes when people generate these rankings for different places, they are looking at kind of resources available to entrepreneurs. So when the resources can be categorized into 3 broad different categories. So the first, financial capital. How easy it is for the entrepreneurs to get access to financing, for example. How good is your banking system in the city? Do you have enough investors in the city? So that's sort of one area that people look at. The second area is the access to human capital. Do you have access to the educated employee? Do you have access to the skilled employee in the city or in the area where you want to start your business? And finally, people look at sort of what they call physical capital. So how expensive it is to rent office spaces, for example, or the start a factory, what is the price for the real estate and all that. So those are kind of things that people have focused on up until now to look at in terms of how friendly or unfriendly a place is for the entrepreneurs.
Yeah, and those rankings that we see right now, these are kind of the three bases that they're using to come up with those rankings. Is that right?
That is exactly right.
But it's not enough, you're thinking.
I think those are really important, and I'm not here to discount the importance of those resources, but I would like to add one more thing during my presentation, which is about what I call social capital. So social capital is the idea basically talks about the benefits you draw from your social network or relationships. I just moved from US to Calgary last year, and I got quite a big hit on my social capital, and now I'm sort of trying to catch up on that. And it is something that it's sort of intuitive idea, and many people kind of get it, but the scholars have not really focused on the research on social capital up until very recently. So if you see the graph here, you will see that there is a pretty steady flat line until 1990s. People have not really studied social capital at all, and then there is a big jump happening starting 1995, and then currently it's really very popular bandwagon that a lot of social scientists, researchers are focusing on.
And are we seeing that because of the onset of social media? Like it seems to be you have to build your networks, you have to be out there and talking to more people and connecting with groups.
Right, and I think that plays a big part on why we are now suddenly realizing how important the social capital or the network you have around you. That's the sort of one reason why we see the big chunk of research done in that area. But another big reason is done by a scholar named Robert Putnam. He single-handedly draw attention to social capital by publishing a book called Bowling Alone in 1995. In that book, he basically argues that the social network and the quality of community in the U.S. has been going downhill from early 1990 to up until very recently. So he was one example of that he talks about is the number of people who go bowling has increased. Yet at the same time, the kind of bowling groups or bowling league has decreased. And basically, he argues that the reason why that's happening is that now people are go to bowling by themselves instead of joining a club. And that explains why the title, he says, Bowling Alone. And he has a bunch of other interesting information. For example, while the people joining a club has declined over the years, he also looked at the number of TV watching hours, for example, which has increased quite a bit. So all of that, he says, he argues in that book is quite worrisome, and that it sort of points to the decline of social capital in the U.S. and decline of community spirit. And he argues that we really need to pay more attention to that. And as you, Kelly, just mentioned, also the fact that we are seeing a lot of social media these days, that also sort of raised the question about whether social media replace our face-to-face community or sort of takes away, or so there is sort of a lot of research based on that. So now some of the things that people have done to point out how social capital matters or why it is so important has been done in the families and youth behavior problems area. So for example, we all know that it takes a village to raise a kid. And if you live in a community where people seem to know each other quite a bit, and the kind of youth behavior problems in that community tends to go down. Again, crime and violence, when people are watching out for each other and creating also the community policing activities and all that, that also tend to reduce the crime and violence rate as well. Schools and education, if you are in a more tightly integrated school, then the quality of education goes up. If you have also good social network, you tend to live more longer and also healthy lifestyle and democracy as well. So if people participate in civic activities, you see the level of democracy in that country goes up a lot as well. So people have been pointing out the importance of social capital in many different areas, but I noticed that people have not really studied social capital and how it influences entrepreneurship. So that's I have spent the last couple of years just focusing on how social capital in cities as well as in nations contribute to the entrepreneurship activities in that setting. So that's what I would like to sort of spend a little bit of time to talk about. Okay?
Yeah.
So before we proceed, I want to sort of ask this question to you. In the next 6 months, do you think there would be a good opportunity starting a business in your city? So if you think that's the case, yes. If you do not see a lot of good opportunities, perhaps you could click on no, and then we'll see what your prospect or your forecast for the entrepreneur opportunities in the city that you live.
I don't know how I would answer this because I see some good opportunities, but it makes me nervous what's happening out there. So.
Right.
See what people think. Wow, they're into it.
Ooh, wow. Yes. So about 77% says that there will be a good opportunities for starting a business in your city. Because this webinar is broadcast to internationally, we don't know what those cities are in this case. I want to sort of draw your attention to the similar survey done in Canada and see what the perceived opportunities in Canada looks like. So if you look at 2014-15, the roughly about 55-53% of respondents in Canada says that they see perceived opportunities in Canada. So that's a pretty large percentage, not as large as our
audience
today,
great,
but yeah. And if you go back in time and look at the trend in Canada, for example, you will see that in 2001 it was roughly about 35%. So over the years, I think people are seeing more and more opportunities if you see the trend here. And let me sort of bring in the similar response rate from UK and US. So if you look at, so it looks like among those three examples, Canada seems to have the highest rate of perceived opportunities, followed by the US, and then UK seems to be the least in terms of perceived opportunities here. Now, many things can account for these different rates, but I just wanted to look at how trust in a given country influences, which is a big component of social capital. So I look at. Let me ask another question here, take another poll here, and ask you another question. That could be, I don't know, do you think most people can be trusted? So again, a little bit ambiguous question, but based on what you think, can you answer yes or no, or whether most people can be trusted or not? So let's sort of
Yeah, and that's your perception too, right? Because am I talking about in my family, in my neighborhood, at my company, at night when I walk somewhere? So yeah, that's interesting.
That's a very broad question, as Kelly rightly pointed out, and it looks like about 67% says that most people can be trusted, and about 32% here. So we see the breakdown in terms of this. And let me bring in sort of another survey result. So if you look at Canada on the very far left-hand side of slide, you see that about 43% of people says that most people can be trusted, lower than our audience today. And if you compare that with the U.S., it's slightly less than Canada, and the U.K. has the least percentage of people who said that most people can be trusted. And if you remember the earlier chart that I showed you in terms of the entrepreneurship opportunities, actually the way people answered in each country sort of corresponds to the trust rate that we are seeing here, right? So Canada, if you remember, has people are seeing the highest opportunity, and we see that there is also most, in terms of trust, Canada seems to have the highest level of trust among 3 countries. We see that. And the UK, for example, has the least opportunities of perception, and we see the also the level of trust the least in this case. So I just conveniently focused on 3 countries here, but in my research I actually looked at about 40 different countries, and the results are pretty much similar to what we just discussed. So if the country that has the highest level of trust seems to perceive their opportunities the most, and the countries that has the least amount of trust also tend to perceive the least amount of opportunities.
So those things really do go hand in hand. That trust factor has to be there to inspire or support that entrepreneurial business or thinking.
Exactly. So if we just look at these numbers, and that made me think about why that is happening. And so if you look at the research a little bit deeply, it turns out that there are 2 different types of trust. One is interpersonal trust, and the other is a general trust. So interpersonal trust has to do with whether you are trusting someone specifically. So Kelly can trust Jim.
You.
Yeah,
I can trust you.
Right, and you could trust even more Jim. So it's a judgment you make based on who you're talking about, right? But if you're talking about general trust, can you trust most people? It has probably not much to do with my trustworthiness or the Jim's trustworthiness, and it has more to do with your own look at orientation of how you look at people, right?
Sure, my perceptions of whatever's beyond my own bubble, right?
Exactly. So if you see, you are basically, when I ask people, can you trust most people? You are basically saying that on average, you are just taking an average trustworthiness of the people, and it turns out that is what really matters for the community. So let's sort of do a little thought experiment here. So let's say that in this community there are red dot people, and then there is a yellow dot people. And I don't know how you define. You could think of red dot as people who are in certain categories in terms of ethnicity, race, or occupation, or whatever, however define it. And if you belong to a low trust society, what's going to happen is that people will be associating with people of the similar kind of orientation, belonging to the similar categories. So red dot people will have a high interpersonal trust with red dot people, and the yellow dot people will have association with the red dot people. But on the other hand, if you have a high general trust, you're going to see the intermixing here, so that people will sort of freely associate with a different type of people. And I believe that is the key reason why when you have a general trust, you're going to see people associating with the people who are different from you or more diverse, and that brings you to the sort of new opportunities that you haven't thought about, and that will lead to the entrepreneur the startups and the entrepreneur opportunity perception. So I think that's the one reason why trust matters. Another reason why trust matters has to do with where you get your fundings or financing, for example. So the survey asked a similar kind of questions about if you invested in a new company, what is your relationship to the person that you invested your money? So if you answer number one, it's sort of basically your family members, and if number two is the extended family members. But if you answer five, that's sort of strangers, but if people with a good business ideas. So if you see this, and if you look at the breakdown of these numbers for across 3 different countries, Canada seems to be most open to invest in people with strangers with a good business idea, and looks like UK is the most likely to invest in their own family members or their extended family members. So again, I think the more trust you have, you are more likely to invest in ideas on ideas, not just your family ties or sort of your relationships. So that increased the entrepreneurship rate in the community. So I think again, I look at many different countries, and I find a very similar pattern as well. So that's sort of the one aspect of social capital, and the other aspect has to do with organization membership. What sort of organization and how many organizations do you participate? So if you look at here, example would be that let's say that there are 3 different types of organizations: schools, churches, and professional associations. If you look at person A, who is in the middle, you see that person A belongs to all 3 different types of organizations. And then if you see person B, B only belongs to the one organization, which is church. And that has implications for how you're going to have your network. Person A has a connection to reaching out to the very different communities, whereas person B is a sort of in an echo chamber where you only associate with the people who are very similar to you. And that also, if you look 3 different countries, it breaks out very similarly. Canada actually tends to have a very diverse set of organization memberships, and UK, on the other extreme, tends to have a very small number of organization memberships. So again, it sort of corresponds to the entrepreneurship rate.
Yeah, level of trust and entrepreneurship.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think up until now, we've been talking about at the different country level. I also studied this in the different cities or communities in the U.S., and we found out exactly the similar kind of patterns playing out in these different cities and communities. So what my research suggests is that financial capital, physical capital, and human capital matters, but we also should also pay attention to social capital as well. So if you ask me what are the takeaways from my presentation, I would say that social fabric of community matters a lot for entrepreneurship. And if you are an entrepreneur, you should think about associating or joining in the network of a high trust and diversity.
So it's interesting because, I mean, that's a point that Jim brought up as well, right? You want to get everybody in the room. And, you know, you seem to say that in the same regard to build that trust, you need everybody in the room from either different organizations or different affiliations. What have you seen, Jim?
Well, I think that I just love this presentation so much because what Suku is talking about is putting a lot of rigor around the idea that I found of how important having diversity in the room is. And he's looked at it from a very serious measurement of trust and social capital. And, well, let me ask you, Suku, I assume that all of these principles would apply to an organization as well as how they apply to a community.
Right. I think I have to agree that even though my research has focused on the community level, if you look at companies or organizations, it's also a community in that sense as well. And so if you, within a company, there is different departments and there are different groups. So if you could, to the extent that you could sort of bring the general trust in the organization or the company, as well as have people intermix and form more diverse network, I think that's sort of the same principle applying to your research setting as well.
And I think that's it. That's key, Suku, because there's a lot of places where there's a real silo built up, either among departments or among, it can be a floor thing, it can be a what we're looking at thing. You know, how do you break down those barriers to kind of build that sense of community, a broader sense of community, and raise that trust?
Exactly.
Are there ways that you would suggest people do that?
So I think one of the ways the company has been doing is that there is a rotation program, so people sort of build career in one department or one specialty, and then have that person rotate to different areas. That's one way. Another way is you will sort of form the cross-department teams. In that way, you will pull people from the different groups or departments, and they get to form their own groups. And then when they go back, so that they serve as a sort of the broker who could link the people from one department to the other departments, I think.
Jim, would you add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question, Kelly. And what I look at, Suku, is like professional organizations. So a law firm, and the lawyers are kind of God, and everybody plays up to them. But some law firms have been very successful in building more of a culture where there is social capital and people will work in more of a team. I don't know if you've had a chance to study that, but I think if we can find ways to break down those walls.
So are you saying like have lawyers in the firm belong to other organizations, not just law firms? Is that?
I'm actually looking more at the diagram where you had the low interpersonal trust, which might be derived from I don't know how to describe it, but I'm a lawyer, so I understand the law. You're just an administrator.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So there's class distinctions within organizations. And I think what I get from you is that you'll have a much more entrepreneurial organization, and I'm going to leap and say maybe a more successful one, if you can break down those barriers and have more general trust among different groups. Is that fair enough to say?
Yes, and we could talk about it as a sort of the one way to do it, but in reality, it's really hard to do. Otherwise, everybody would have done it.
Sure.
So if your organization is really good at doing this and build up the general trust, it's a sort of the competitive advantage that you have, and it's very hard to copy from your competitors. Will have very hard time to copy it. So.
And that's the place you want to go work at, isn't it?
Exactly.
You know, they're the ones that are drawing people in, and you want to be part of that experience, I think, instead of that siloed thing that we sometimes get into. We have somebody asking kind of in a broader sense, is there a role that government can play in building a broader climate of trust and diversity? And I'd like you both to maybe answer that. You might have something, but let's start with you, Soku.
So is there, I'm sorry, can you repeat?
Is there a role that government has to play in building that broader climate of trust and diversity?
Yes and no. I think there is a policy that you could sort of implement and increase, but at the same time, this really has to be sort of done at the grassroots level. So I think I'm not saying that government or the top level doesn't have anything to do with it, but it's at the end of the day, I think you're gonna only see the effect if it's done at the grassroots level. So I don't know whether I'm answering that question or not.
Yeah, I think the government has to be pretty careful. They can help in terms of making it clear that diversity and respect are principles that are of the utmost importance. And then I guess the other way is politicians or leaders who demonstrate the appreciation of diversity and open society. That would probably help. But it's pretty limited, I think, and one has to be careful with the role that government plays in this.
Okay, thank you so much to both of you for your presentations today. I know we learned a lot. We weren't able to get to all of the questions, but I do appreciate all the questions that did come in. There are a number of upcoming webinars that you can participate in the next few days, and if you don't have a chance to be a part of these webinars, you can have access to them anytime by going to our website and checking out or downloading the ebooks, watching videos on our scholars' research. Just go to ucalgary.ca/explore/collections. And if there's a topic that you would like us to do for you that you maybe haven't seen yet, you can email us at exploreucalgary@ucalgary.ca. Thank you so much for joining our presentation today, and to the presenters, thank you so much for being a part of it.
Thank you.